Old Troll and the Wolves. The story of a watchdog as told by a grandmother to her grandchild. When I was a little girl, I lived in the frontier cabin. On the cold March Sunday of my story, I was 10 years old. Father and mother were going to church 7 miles away, and the horse was saddled and brought to the door. A pillion, a cushioned seat on which mother could sit, was placed behind the saddle. She kissed me and told me to take good care of baby Huldah. Then father told Ura, my 9-year-old brother, to feed the cattle at noon and to turn them out to drink, but not allow them to wander off into the woods. We were rather lonely after father and mother rode away. After a while, we ate our dinner and baked apples and milk. Then, to amuse baby Huldah, we had a frolic with old Troll, our watchdog. Suddenly, Troll stopped playing, and with a smothered growl sprang to the door. He put his nose all along the crack at the bottom, sniffing and growling. "Let him out," I said, as I caught up with baby Huldah. Whatever was on the other side of the door, I was sure Troll could take care of it. When Ura opened the door, Troll shot out with great fierceness. We closed the door after him, too frightened to look out, but we could hear him scurry along the path. All was still for a moment. Then came a terrible howl from the direction of the barn. This was followed by another howl that seemed to come from the throat of some fierce animal. We heard the sound of scuffling in the snow and a long drawn-out cry of pain from Troll. An instant later he was at the door, whining piteously. Ura and I looked at each other. We were afraid to open that door, but Troll was in danger and we could not let him stay outside and face it alone. We quickly opened the door and let him in. His hair was standing up on end and his tail was between his legs. As he went slinking around the room, he kept growling to himself. There were only 3 small windows in our cabin, and they were so high that only father was tall enough to look through them. Ura dragged a chair over to each window in turn, climbed up and looked out. When he could see nothing outside, he got down and began to laugh. "Oh, you coward, you!" He pointed his finger at Troll. "I know what ails you. You're afraid to be out alone." We all laughed then, and our courage came back. Ura began to bundle himself up, tying his comforter around his ears. "Father told me to feed the cattle at noon," he said. "I'll wrap up the baby and go with you," I offered. "No, sis," said Ura bravely. "You and the baby can wait outside, but stay near the door." He watched him run down the path to the barnyard. We watched him open the plank door, and I could hear him inside talking to the cattle. Then I heard him open the sheep pen. First to come out were the oxen, then the cows. They acted queer, sniffing with their noses high in the air. I was so interested in watching them that I did not notice anything else. When Ura came out behind the sheep, he called, "Say, sis, did you hear that noise?" I shook my head. The cattle were going down to the brook, crunching the snow under their hoofs. "There it is again," called Ura. This time I heard it. A howl came from the distance, then another, and another. I knew they were wolf howls. The chorus of howls had hardly ceased when they came an answering howl from the woods above the house. Then 3 gaunt, ugly wolves shambled across the open space. They stopped across from where the cattle were drinking. The poor sheep, bleeding with fright, scattered in every direction, while the lamb ran into the shallow brook. The cattle tossed up their heads and snorted, then stampeded for the barn. The oxen bellowed and stayed for a moment with lowered horns facing the wolves. But one of the wolves raised his nose and gave a fearful howl. The oxen also turned and fled for the barn. "Run for the house," I screamed. "I can't," he called. "The sheep. Let Troll out." Father had said to see that the sheep and cattle were shut in, and it never occurred to Ura to disobey. My fingers were trembling so I could hardly lift the latch, but finally I had the cabin door open. Troll came sniffing out. He shook himself as though to shake off his fear. Then he ran, barking, to the barn. When Ura said "sheep," The dog understood this as a command. To tend the sheep was one of his regular duties, and he ran off to drive them in. Soon he had them all in except the lamb, and Ura fastened the animals in the barn. I saw him and Troll come out to the barnyard. A moment more and the plank door was shut and fastened. But they had forgotten the lamb. "Oh, poor Dickie's in the brook," I cried. Forgetting everything else, I ran down the path to the brook, with baby Huldah in my arms. Ura followed and grabbed Dickie by his fleece just as another howl broke on the air. One glance into the woods back of the cabin showed us more wolves slinking among the trees. We all hurried pell-mell into the house, baby Huldah and I, the dog, Ura, and the lamb. As soon as the door was shut and barred, I burst out crying. Ura walked about the room, breathing hard. The dog walked after him. Dickie stood trembling in the middle of the floor, the water dripping from his wool. He shook so hard his hoofs made a clatter on the floor. Instead of crying, I began to laugh. Then I noticed how near Ura was to tears. A sob came up in his throat. "Father, Mother," he said. We stared into each other's white faces. Father and Mother would soon be starting home from church, and they did not know about the gathering of the wolves. I'll never forget those next few hours. The cruel howling went on, sometimes at a distance, sometimes close at hand. The cabin seemed to be surrounded by wolves. They even came up to the door, made bold by their hunger. We stood clinging together and crying, while old Troll circled around us. At each new sound he licked our hands, as though trying to tell us he would protect us. Several times we heard stealthy footsteps on the banked-up snow outside the cabin, but we never thought of the windows. But old Troll was more alert. His quick ears detected the approach of an animal, and the crash came as at the frail window frame. Troll growled and leapt up on the chair that Ura had left beneath the window. For a moment I saw the wolf's face at the window. I saw Troll seize the animal under the jaw. The wolf tried to pull away so he could get nearer his foe, but Troll held on. Then I hid my eyes in baby Huldah's hair, but I could not shut out the sound of hoarse growls and yells of pain and rage. After what seemed a long time, I heard Ura say, "You may look now, sis. The wolf is gone." Troll looked out the window with the last savage growl as though warning the enemy. Then he jumped down, still growling and licking his chops as though trying to bite off his anger, since he could no longer get at his foe. We huddled together, trying not to worry about Father and Mother, while old Troll kept watch. He must have sat there for an hour or more. Baby Huldah cried herself to sleep in my lap, and I was so tired I must have dozed. Suddenly Troll gave a loud bark. I woke up to see him frisking and scratching at the door. "Children, open the door," called Father. We rushed to undo the latch. We could not get the door open fast enough. There stood Father and Mother, and in a minute we were all laughing and crying together as they gathered us in their arms. It seemed that they had heard nothing of the gathering of the wolves until they started for home. They were very much alarmed and had hurried the horse up the hill as fast as they could. Poor Mother, she never could speak of that ride afterwards without crying. The strangest part of the story is that after the day there were never any wolves seen in those parts. We children always liked to think that this was because old Troll had frightened them away.